even more flexible than we already are.
Yeah, and I've seen a great shift in districts and principals at state level really learning to, who really hesitated with online learning in the past because they were concerned about accountability or
Mm-hmm.
reliability, really starting to see the value of choices and flexibility. And so that I think is going to be a lasting shift. I hope anyway, that folks are embracing all of this a little bit more and keep us from dragging you all over the place. I mean, we still love a good conference, but
Right.
today it's nice to not have to drive across the state to get to some good workshops. So.
I do think it's changed the way, I know it's changed the way we as Virginia TESOL will function as a board. We actually, so for everybody that's a member, in a few weeks, you're going to be getting a copy of our new articles of incorporation. We've kind of updated them, but as a board, we've talked about how we don't have to do just conferences. It's much more than that. And this has made us think about like doing these types of activities and book clubs and different things to bring people professional development in I think they're easier ways than, like you said, traipsing across the state for that live conference. So.
All right, well, let's get started. And as if more people show up, we will let them on in. Again, we are recording, so if for any reason you have to step away for a minute or something goes wrong with your connection, we are recording, and after we finish, takes a little while for Zoom to send us the recording, maybe an hour or so or two, and then for me to then re-upload it. But I will put the recording on the same page where you registered, and then I'll send you the link again because it's been a while since some of you registered. So the recording will be right in the same spot, and I'll also put the PowerPoint slides there that you can download, because as we go through, you'll be able to pull some of those slides out and use them as templates for yourself in working with students, hopefully. So you'll be able to grab those as well. They'll all be there for you. So that's usually the first questions that come up. So while I get my screen shared, Rebecca, do you want to just give a little introduction and any more official welcomes?
I just wanted to say hello to everyone from Virginia TESOL. We're excited to have Kelly and the English Learner Portal to do this webinar. And I know Kelly will be sure to talk about it, but she has lots of different professional development opportunities as well. And we just are excited to help support each and every one of you as we turn into this fall, whether or not that's online, hybrid, combination of many different modalities. And so I'm just going to say, Kelly, take it away. And just for you members, let us know what you need and we can find the people to help provide that. So just remember our Gmail account, vatesol@gmail.com, and let us know what you need. But thank you so much, Kelly, for doing this for us.
No, thank you. It's my time where I get to be with people.
Yeah, right.
Very isolated these days. So I look forward to webinars and Zoom right now. I know everybody's getting a little burnt out on Zooming, but I love it for this purpose. If you haven't yet, please go ahead and introduce yourself in the chat. We always save the chat as well, so that way you can look back if there was somebody who made a comment that you really liked or mentioned a resource that you wanted to chat about or reach out to, or someone who does similar work or works nearby. You'll always be able to go back and refer back to that and find out who they were, and then we can help you get in touch with them down the road. So go ahead, and if you haven't introduced yourself yet, go right ahead. We're going to be talking about engaging students in online learning. And of course, we're doing this with an English learner focus because that's the VATESOL and the English Learner Portal thing. But what's really important to remember, especially when you're sharing strategies with content teachers, or I remember I saw in there that some of you have switched to content teaching from ESL or vice versa. I went back and forth a few times myself. That everything we're talking about is language development and content development. So it applies to every student. And when we approach things in that way, we get a lot more buy-in from our co-teachers and colleagues. So something to think about as we go forward, because you are welcome to share everything that I put on the website with others. I'm not very territorial when it comes to information because I did not create language development research. We just read it, explore it, and apply it in realistic ways. So this is me on a better hair day. You know, I'm in Maryland, so it's been rainy and humid and crazy. So we've got the humid hair going on today. But this is from a recent WITA conference. So I have, this is 25 plus years. I think this is going into year 27 of public school experience. I started as an ESL teacher in Prince George's County, Maryland. At one point along the way, moved in to become a classroom teacher because a teacher went out on maternity leave and I loved her class. And so I asked if I could take it and it was perfect. Later down the road, I moved to Montgomery County, Maryland, both very large ESL population districts just over the line from you all in Virginia. And there I was a classroom teacher, technology training, which is when I really first got into developing online professional development and resources. And we built our first online course in 2005. Can you imagine? Then I moved into administration because after a while, you know, that's just the path people take. And I was elementary assistant principal in Montgomery County for 3 years in 2 different schools. Decided that the timing wasn't right with the age of my children and the hours involved. Took a little spin in North Carolina for a couple years and opened a newcomer center there for a high school in Onslow County, North Carolina. And then came back to Anne Arundel County, Maryland, where I was the district coordinator for 6 years for ESL, where we went from 2,500 students to almost 7,000 in that 6-year period. So you want to talk about growth under fire, we can chat about all that. So after a while, as that program grew, I got a little antsy because it became much more administration and much less with teachers and students. And the teachers and students is the part I love. So I made the switch, took a leave of absence, and decided I was going to try to, I was doing some training for the WITA Consortium, and let's try to make English Learner Portal work. And so it's been 2 years of full-time English Learner Portal, and I love it. But I have to say, last year, I guess around December, November, December, I really started getting antsy to be back in the school. So I took a part-time position in Queen Anne's County here in Maryland, just working with high school newcomers, and I love it. I love being back with kids. I love being back with teachers in the classroom. And then school closed a couple months later. So hopefully I'll get to go back at some point. All right, so let's get into our content. I'm going to do a combination of sharing some general best practices, but then also 2 different lesson planning templates that you can use and hopefully branch off of. So you leave with not just good best practices and some ideas, but some real practical templates you can then go and modify for yourself. If you have any questions along the way, we have a reasonable size group, so feel free to put it in the chat box. When we get to a stopping point, we can turn on the mics later and whatever you're most comfortable with. But don't hesitate to ask. If you have a good resource to share, go ahead and put that in the text, in the chat box too. All right, so you're here. Why are you here? We're feeling all kinds of pressure that we talked about, and still like trying to hold on to that silver lining that all of this is going to turn out some really great teaching once we get used to it. So if you would like to share, just put a few ideas in the box. Like, what are your greatest concerns? What do you feel like you could use more support with? And whether it's through today or in the future, we will definitely be looking at those needs and seeing what we can do to help you out with a combination of Virginia TESOL and English Learner Portal. So what are you thinking? What are your greatest concerns right now when it comes to this teaching online? And so Jamie is talking about relationships. I know that's been weighing on my mind too. We do so much of that just through casual conversations, passing in the hall, you know, saying hi as students come in. And so we're losing a lot of those opportunities. So we'll have to be creative about how to do that. Keeping English learners engaged. Hopefully we'll give you some ideas to help with that today. Getting the technology started for those who are new. Yeah, those who didn't go through this last year with us, it'll be a stretch a little bit. I've heard Julia's concern a lot this week, and from the other group in the webinar we did earlier this week as well, about not being sure what our roles are as the ESL folks. We used to push in, or we used to do pull out, and what does that look like now? We're all competing for time with the students, and we don't want to give them endless hours on the computer, but we do want to get to them. So we'll talk about that a little bit as well. Ongoing assessment, okay. Yeah, let's chat about that later on. Like, how can we work that in? I like that, Lisa, that you're already saying, because that is one of the tips we'll talk about, is using flash drives to house a lot of this information for students who don't have Wi-Fi access or reliable access. So already a good tip, and we'll talk about how that works. I think the most important thing before we dive into the content is to understand that it really is okay that we don't have all the answers right now. I won't say which district, but in a district I worked in the past, we had the motto of there's opportunity in chaos. And so when things are wide open and there's no answers, just try to look at it from that way of, when there are no answers, you get to kind of make up some of those answers. So what do we want it to be? And we can play with things and explore them and do things we haven't thought of before. And collaboration is going to be really key. So we'll talk about that too a little later, about some opportunities that we can offer for you to continue to collaborate with others. That sharing is going to be more crucial than ever. Right, so scheduling and services and all of that. Lots of conversations about that everywhere. So let's get into my concern when this all started was like, this image did it for me. It's like everything you do in the classroom, there's so much you put into it. Some of it is unconscious, some of it is conscious, but that relationship building, the eye contact, the proximity, like I said, the passing in the hallway, the car rider loop, or, you know, sports in the high school, all those places where you build such a rich environment is reduced down to your face on the screen. And so I was concerned about that at first, but we're really starting to find some ways to bridge that. So let's try to, again, keep that positive mindset and embrace it. And I like what Adil is saying about, do you think blended learning will stick around after the pandemic? And my personal opinion is I hope so, because I think we, one or the other isn't reaching all students, but a combination of all possible things would be a good scenario in my mind. Like, how can we get the best of each piece and continue to use it for students? So let's think about that. All right, so a couple of really basic tips we learned, especially when I was trying to work with the high school newcomers in my classes this year, and what I've heard from others is to think about strategies and ways, and we'll talk about a few moving forward, that you can reduce the amount of toggling back and forth between documents. Because we were in such a hurry in the spring to get stuff up and get things online, there were a lot of scanned documents, open the resource page from the textbook, then open the question sheet, then open the rubric, then open another chat, and all of these windows open got to be a big challenge for students to go between all of them. And some of our students were doing their work on phones. And so toggling between all of those documents got to be a little complicated. So we'll go through some suggestions of how to minimize that and how to use hyperlinks and how to use templates that can give students some structure and guidance instead of looking at their online classroom like a filing cabinet full of papers to shuffle. So again, if you have any things that you tried or tips along the way, feel free to add them into the chat as well. So just being very conscious of how much navigating has to happen. And especially for our younger students when we have parents who are helping with this. And you know, the school world, the teacher world is not the parent world. And so we don't all think alike. And when you are working in an online environment, you have to think like the person who organized it. I have a hard enough time finding my own files. Like, what was I thinking that day when I organized it? Okay. So here's an example of providing a simple structure that is very predictable. Anytime you can use the same kind of format, it will save you a lot of time, and your students will be able to get into it without a lot of direction because they've done this before and they know exactly what you want. So this is one of the templates that I'll have for you to download. And this is all around a lesson sequence for a read aloud with the book Wings by Christopher Myers. It's a great book. And it really talks about diversity and being different and being proud of who you are and accepting others. So great beginning of the year read aloud. I do read alouds in 5 steps so that students know exactly where we're going every time we start a read aloud on activity 1, activity 2, activity 3, 4, 5. Now, some of those activities change based on the standard that we're addressing at the time. So for these particular ones, we work on some sequencing and we work on character traits and justifying and citing evidence. If you're working on other standards, it's easy to work that in. You can use the same template and same flow. You just change up your questions and your activities a little bit. So how this works is the students have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and they know the exact order to go to. They don't have to scroll through a list of files and find the right one. So they click on activity 1, and they jump on in. Ooh, let me get in there. So before we see activity 1, personalizing your lessons with added video, that will be in activity 1. It took me a while to get over my fear of video. You know, you're being self-conscious, you know, everybody can see it. And after a while, you just let it go. Right? Don't worry about it. What really matters, that video is what is going to maintain the connection between you and your students when you're not working with them synchronously, when you're not live with them online. What I found is that you can put your personality into your lessons more with video. What also really helps is that when you use video, you are adding ways to make your lessons comprehensible to all students. So you are providing the listening part where they're listening to the information. You're providing the visual. They have your facial expressions. They can see your mouth. You can use gestures. You can hold things up so you get some extra video visuals in there. And it's just your personality shows through. And they know, they get your little jokes or whatever sayings you use in your classroom, and you can find ways to keep students engaged because they feel like it's you. They don't really see you behind the list of files that we dealt with in the early spring when we had no choice but to go super fast. So think about anywhere you can put in just a little personalization with video will make things much clearer. So here's our example, and a perfect example of how whenever you freeze frame a video, you're never making a good face. Never, never, ever. So my first step in the read aloud is always to just read straight through one time to enjoy the story and to just get into what's happening. We tend to want to ask a lot of questions and work on our standards and do all of that. And what I've heard from students a number of times when we're doing model lessons and things is that they'll say, can we just read the story? Like, I just want to know what happens. And so I agreed with students along the way that from now on, first time, we just enjoy the book that someone wrote for us to read. Later, we'll take it apart. So I find that read alouds are a great way to use video. There's a couple different ways you can do video with your read alouds. In this one, the first time through, I read it. And I think it's another opportunity to develop that relationship with you. They get to know you, your tone of voice, your reaction to things. I try not to get into conversation too much in that first read through because I always promise them that it's just to enjoy it, but you'll have some reactions here and there like, oh, I wasn't expecting that. And they'll enjoy it more because it's you. And it makes them feel more at home because that's something you would have done in the classroom and they remember that and they like that familiarity. What we also can use for read alouds, and we know multiple exposures to text is crucial, especially for our English learners. We want them to enjoy this story over and over because each time they get something new out of it and they learn fluency and they pick up different structures and vocabulary that's included. So there's so much to get out of it. For this particular lesson sequence, I have them listen to me read it first. Many authors now are posting videos on YouTube of them reading their own books. So you could always then link to the author for one of the read alouds and then let them hear from the person itself, which makes it a little more interesting. You lose a little bit of you in the personal connection, but it's great to also hear from the author. For Wings, there is a teacher, Miss Kai, and she has a website called Woke Kindergarten, W-O-K-E. And Woke Kindergarten, she has different video lessons that clearly she's using in online teaching and has been gracious to share. But she does the read aloud of Wings with all of the questioning and addressing standards. So I have the students listen to her for the second read through because they get a different face, a different perspective. and she asks great questions. So we have her read it through as well. The other good part about collecting all of these read alouds now is that you can set up, you know, whether it's in your Google Slides or PowerPoint slides within your classroom, you can set up a virtual classroom library where if students have time online and, you know, in the evening when they're not with teachers and they want to go back, they can listen to all your read alouds. That can be independent work you leave for them. And then later, at some point when we go back to school for real in person, you will have all of these pre-recorded read alouds that you can use as independent workstations that you can share with parents to model how to do read alouds with their students. It can be homework, reinforcements, station rotations, like you said, like getting more into the flipped classroom. You know, they can participate in some of this before they come in and be ready to talk about it. So think about that and how you can double dip with everything you create. What can I create that will help now that I can also repurpose when we get back to school in person? And videos will be a great way to do that. When you're working with content teachers, especially, if you're co-teaching or co-planning, or any time that it involves the technology, in ESL, we're used to simplifying directions. I mean, that's our world. That's what we do all the time. But I find that online, you have to go even further with that. So when I'm coaching content teachers to plan instruction that includes attention to language, we always talk about the I+1, you know, the input hypothesis, and that, you know, here's their instructional level, and if we want their language to grow, we have to model and support them, and how are we going to work that a little higher into their lesson planning? It's one of the things we do in our workshops. But when it comes to directions, I want the exact opposite. I want you to go backward and make sure that the directions are in a proficiency level that is lower than their comfort zone, so you ensure they get it. We don't want the directions to be the barrier. Simplified and repetitive, and again, putting the spoken word with the visual, with the text on the screen. So for example, when our students are doing this read aloud sequence and they go in activity 1, everything is here on the screen. Now this was built for intermediate level proficiency students, but you see the directions are short sentences, simple words, because I just want to make sure they get it. In this TV screen here, if you click on the TV, it's another video, like one and a half minutes. It seems like a lot to do, but really I created all the videos for this in about 10 minutes between the read aloud and these little instructions. So there's a video of me, and I go through the directions with them. And I go through it like I would in the classroom. So they have it in print, and then they have me explaining it, and they have multiple ways to get what I'm trying to say to them. And then I also link right to the Google Doc. So I put everything that they're going to need in one document. So they open one other page, and they have the video, and they have their, I guess it's an electronic worksheet kind of thing. I am not at all a big worksheet person, but in this case, it really does help give the supports and structure. So there are boxes to take notes. There are like 3 boxes for sequencing. There are pictures they can drag around to put in order. So it helps them get through all of those structures. So lesson sequences like this, this says sequencing, but if you think about it like routines, protocols, lesson sequences, all of that. Super important when working with students online because it is predictable and follows a pattern, and that really helps students to lower the amount of processing they have to do with each new activity. So if all of your read alouds follow the same structure, all of them have 5 steps. All of them start with a similar looking screen. I changed the images a little, I changed the colors up a little, but they all have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we don't have to talk a lot about directions. I don't have to record lengthy sets of directions. They know what to do. I just record a few little reminders. All of that processing they're saving on directions, they can then use on the content. So you'll save time in class, you'll save energy for you and the students. And it is so simple that once you build your first template, and then when you want to switch to a new read aloud, you just change a couple images, change a couple activities, and you're ready to roll. But the shells are already there. So a lot faster in planning. I'll show you another kind of lesson sequence that we use a lot in a few minutes, so you can see how building these types of routines and structures will help you in your planning and help them to access the activities more quickly without having to go through a lot of directions every time. So I'm going to model this in a second, but modeling the desired outcome. When we're working online, there's so little feedback for students. There's less input. They can't look to their neighbor. They can't have a quick conversation. They can't scan the room to figure out what's going on. We know when we're working with students, a lot of their comprehension comes from all of these other things that are going on in the room and not necessarily from the teacher. So the more structured modeling you do, the better. And that's also a place where you can fit in. If you're struggling, what's your role as the ESL person, is to be willing to be the model or to create the model. I think most teachers are very welcoming if you say, let me take a part of that for you. Can I create a model, and can I walk us through it and show it? And make sure, again, that it's super rich so that students know exactly where you're going and they can spend less time on the directions. So here's some example. When we do a lesson sequence around literacy development, it can be any level of literacy, but I use it most often in early literacy because it provides a ton of support. And it doesn't matter if it's early literacy at kindergarten, first grade, second grade, or whether it's early literacy in middle school and high school for our interrupted education students. Early literacy is early literacy, and we change the context to fit the age. But the process works regardless of age. So here's a structure we use a lot when we do workshops with teachers, that these are the components that go into a good content lesson that is also focused on language development. And we want to do both at the same time. So we start at the bottom and work our way up. Our lesson sequences for literacy always start with a foundation of word knowledge. So sometimes it might be a vocabulary type lesson, but more often it's just developing that bank of words that students will need to create their final product, whether it's speaking or writing later. What words do I want to hear them say? Do I want to see in their writing in the end? And I'm going to plan for that up front and make sure we give that to them up front. I'll show you how in just a minute. Then through the middle is our sentence level, and we have to think about, in our final product, what kinds of sentences do we want our students to be using? Are these beginning English speakers who are doing simple sentences that we're modeling, and we're modeling how to put the adjective before the noun? Or are these more advanced students and we are building sentences that are complex with transitions and temporal phrases and all kinds of things. Then we have to think about what we want those to be so we can include those in our model as well. And then we get into the discourse, the whole flow of how are we putting this all together? Are they doing a paragraph, an essay, a couple sentences? Is it a play? What do we want in the end in our model? So those are the three levels we work through in our literacy lesson sequence. And this is what it looks like as we go. So we call these whole to part because we really start with more of a whole language type of approach and then get into breaking it down into parts and doing mini lessons within. So you might have a grammar lesson, you might have a pronunciation lesson, and be working on editing skills. We break it down into the parts toward the end of the sequence, but we start with big picture. So in our whole to part lesson, we start with the objective. Excuse me, 1 second. Too much talking. Okay, so our messy objective, I love this strategy because it makes me as the teacher have to really think about what do I want to happen and then make sure that the students know exactly what I want to happen so that they can be ready for it. And it also sets us up with some brainstorming, generating background knowledge, doing a quick vocabulary review. You get to do a lot of that warm-up stuff right within your messy objective, and it makes for a great warm-up. So here's an example. If in my whole to part lesson, we can create a collaborative narrative using specific science vocabulary, descriptive adjectives, and temporal phrases. So I am being very explicit about what language I want because we're going to keep coming back to this and making sure that those targets are in our final product. Right? I want to remind myself to look for those because those are my teaching points, and I want to remind students to be looking for those and know what to call them. So in messy objective, we do it the first time through. It takes a little bit. It may take 5-10 minutes to get through. But again, that time and structure is well worth it in the long run because everybody knows exactly where you're going and you really have done some vocabulary and background knowledge development as well. So it goes something like this where we say, we can create. What does create mean? And the students give you input. You can do this on the whiteboard in some of the online platforms if you have a whiteboard ability. You can do it on a piece of paper under a document camera. I still love chart paper. I kill too many trees, but we'll put the chart paper on the wall and turn the camera on us and model writing on it with markers and really making it messy. We use icons for what we call the thinking verbs to make sure that we're consistent all the time. Remember, create is when you make or produce something new, and we have an icon for that. I have them on magnets, or I have them in clip art I can put on things. All right, so we can make or build a collaborative narrative. What's collaborative? We're going to make something collaborative, and so we talk about what that is. We're going to work together. We're going to cooperate. Narrative. We can create a collaborative narrative. What's a narrative? What does a narrative have? It has a beginning, a middle, and an end. We know that. It's like a story. So we're really doing a lot of brainstorming, and they're already thinking about, okay, I know what these things are. I know where we're going. They're already getting some ideas together. And we work through, each time we cover a new concept, we go back to the beginning and read it through again. We can create a collaborative narrative. So that means we're going to make or build a story together. Right? We're going to create a collaborative narrative so that restating, revoicing, and then coming back to the academic language in the end is perfect. So while it seems very complex for lower proficiency levels, you're pulling them through it and talking them through it So they really can handle that level of academic language. This is also an opportunity to start some brainstorming, because I know in the end, they're going to be writing a narrative in groups. And maybe if I wanted to extend it a little longer, it would end with them individually, independently writing a narrative. But I may or may not go there this time. But this is starting to create our rubric as well. So you know it has to have specific science vocabulary. You know I'm looking for adjectives, and you know I'm looking for temporal phrases. So there are my little mini lessons right there. The students know exactly where. And we can brainstorm those a little. Like, oh, you know what that is. Things when you say in the morning, after lunch, a few days later, and get the students to give you some ideas and jot them down. So that kicks off our day one. And then also in day one, we move into creating a word bank. So remembering we're looking for that specific science vocabulary. This is a science integrated lesson. And so I want to guide them into brainstorming science-related vocabulary that will make their narrative a little richer. So we start whole-to-part lesson sequences with an image. Selecting your image becomes something I can't tell you how long I looked for an image that had more than one person and had enough in it to give me adjectives and science words and some kind of time frame reference. So you have to think about what you want and make sure your image is going to pull that out. In high school, we've done this with showing a picture of a cell under a microscope. And they do some brainstorming around that. It brings out the vocabulary. It brings out a lot of questions. At this point, we often do arts integration strategy called I see, I think, I wonder. And for a few minutes, everything they say has to start with I see. All right. And then again, I'm either recording it on a screen. Maybe I started a Google Doc with a word bank, or I'm putting it on chart paper, creating an anchor chart. Something that I can take a picture of and then share it with them for their reference in the rest of the week. But however you want to do it, we create a word bank, and the students just start with I see. I see a woman. I see a girl. And in my word bank, I'm just putting woman, girl, not the whole sentence for this. Now, hopefully they're pulling out some of the science. If not, then I have to prompt that. I'm like, okay, so we've been studying plants. Give me some words related to the plants in this picture. And they can say there are flowers that I see a stem, I see leaves, I see soil, I see sunshine, like whatever the things that they've learned work in this plant life cycle here. If they're not hitting all of the words, then of course you know how to feed those in. You're like, what do you call that thing in her hand there? And it's not really a shovel, so you can do a little vocabulary development that way. Create your word bank. That's usually like end of day one if you have a 30-minute lesson. And then we're going to use all of these words for the rest of the week in our lesson sequence. So let's keep practicing them. You may also want to, if you have beginning English proficiency students, you might want to put the labels right on the picture so that, you know, here's woman, here's girl, so that there's a connection between the word bank and the image itself, so that doesn't get lost. You can also go back to your word bank and add clip art or drawings or images into there as well later. Right, day two, we review our MESI objective and we talk about how we're going to start taking all of the words we generated and start putting them into sentences. We're not creating the narrative yet. We're just creating some sentences that talk about this picture. They might end up in our narrative, they might not. And here's where I'm targeting that sentence level. So think about the proficiency level of your students. What is your goal for them? And make sure your frames are modeling that goal a little bit higher than their current proficiency level. So your expectations are clear up front, and you can have your teachable moments in here. So we take turns, we'll just go through using my frames first. Let's start with what's on the screen. Blank has a blank. How can we make that into a sentence? You can do think alouds with that. You can have particular students share one or two responses. And then this would be a great time to break off and do some think, pair, share. Read through, take a few minutes, think about what sentences you would make, maybe have them jot them down. And then if you have breakout room possibilities, they can go into partner groups or small groups and share their sentences that they came up with. They can also, I've done before where we open a Google Doc and everyone can just start typing in it and we just watch all of the sentences appear in the Google Doc, or they can stick them on a Padlet, whatever, depends on where you're going and what their levels are, if you want it to be oral or written. Once we generate some sentences using my models, then I add to our anchor chart under the word bank, just, okay, give me some other things, and we start writing some sentences. So these are lots of ideas we can use in our narrative. By the time we do the guided part, pick out a few teachable moments, and then go into partner work and summarize, that's usually a whole ESL lesson right there in itself, or small group rotation. So day 3, we then start thinking about the narrative part. And we're thinking now today's focus is that the concept of time and how an author shows time. And so I'm looking for the use of the comma. I'm looking for creative ways to show time. I want to get students away from first, next, then last, right? We can start there, but let's make it more interesting. And plants grow in a certain time frame. So let's be scientifically accurate in our explanation. So in the beginning, they're planting, right? So what time of day is it? There's sunshine, so is it morning? Is it afternoon? Is it after dinner? When is this happening? The middle of our narrative, are we just describing one day, the day they're planting? Or is our narrative going to cover the whole time from when they plant the seeds to when they see the final product and the flowers grow? So we talk about those kinds of things. Are we capturing one day in time? If we do the whole growing the plant, how long of a time is that? We'll have to build that in, and how do we say it? So later that week, a few weeks later, every day we checked, by the 4th week, how much time are we talking about? And we start brainstorming all of those kinds of ideas. And this becomes part of our anchor chart where we have some options for beginning, middle, and end. It's really becoming kind of like a buffet of ideas that they can pull from. We do some work with that, give them some time, again, to interact with each other, toss around some ideas. Tomorrow we're going to start our narrative. Where might we go? Get with a partner and talk about how you think we should structure our narratives and do some brainstorming. Here's an example of when we did this in a workshop last week in Colorado. We did the collaborative paragraph in that each student in the group wrote 2 sentences. One had beginning, one had middle, one had end, and then they put their sentences together. They had to put them in an order that made sense, and they read through. And so we ended up with 3 short stories because my goal for this one was to do it collaboratively and really work on that speaking and interaction as well, not just the writing part. As you can see then, like these are all scribbled on in multicolors. In the last day, we went through the editing process and we have some editing protocols we use. Again, routines and protocols. So it's always the same. They know exactly what to do. When I take out the orange marker, they know that that means you're adding description. When I take out the green, that means you're adding more interesting vocabulary in here. So instead of saw, they changed to discovered. You know, we focus on one thing at a time and work through our editing. So this becomes their collaborative narrative. We bring in the reading we have the group that wrote it, read it aloud to the rest of the class, and we do some evaluation, right? Did they have interesting adjectives? Did they have some science vocabulary in there? Did they have, could you tell what the time was, how much time went by? Did they have some of that in there? And then we can continue it on with reading, by then they're reading each other's stories. Then we can compare and contrast stories. We all started with the same image, but we got 3 very different stories or narratives. So let's do compare and contrast with them. One activity we do is to take a clean copy. I'll type it out their version, or if they've done it in Google Docs, you already have it. And we swap, and then they can then go back in and color code. So highlight in orange, you know, everything, everywhere you see interesting adjectives. You know, go back, give them something to look for, and they go in and analyze. This is now where they're analyzing the model. These are the model texts, and they're analyzing the model to find out what makes a good model. After all that analysis, then they're ready to write their own independently, and they can use their own ideas. They can use a combination of all 3 stories, but they have a ton of models and supports in place to create their final independent narrative if you choose to go that way. In this lesson sequence, I kept it to 5 days, and we just finished with analyzing a model. Next time around, we'll go to the independent writing, but we pretty much exhausted this topic by the time we got to day 5. So again, just an example of, we can use that same lesson structure, and it really helps you to plan, because next time you can say, okay, we're doing this about money. And we put up a picture, and then we go through the process about money. And you use the same kinds of steps, build your word bank, build your sentence structures, start putting the discourse together, and then do your analysis of your model. That same flow, but you can switch up the activities to keep it fresh. If it's independent or partner or collaborative or with sentence strips, or are they doing it in a different way? There's a million different combinations. At the end, this is what we do to start analyzing. Here are our sentence starters, look at the models, and then this is kind of our exit ticket here. Blank is an example of specific science vocabulary. Can they pick it out? And then we have that discussion. How'd you do? Did you include them? Where are they? What is it? And again, that's, you know, the metacognition, and we're getting into all that. All right, so I've been talking forever. It's almost our hour. I want to let you guys have some conversation as well, and answer any questions. So before we start questions, a lot of these strategies and others are in our 2 online courses that we have getting ready to go. Right now we have online language and literacy development currently running. We begin another section on August 22nd. Some of these strategies are included in there, but it's 5 hours of just like this. Presenters, some are me, some are other folks from around the country, sharing ideas and templates of things you can do online, and you can tweak and make your own easily. We had enough contributions to the bank of ideas that we then created a second 5-hour course that's very similar, just 5 hours more of ideas, called Delving Deeper, as a part 2. Both of those open on August 22nd. And if you can enroll in both at the same time, you have access to it for the entire school year. So it's not something you have to go in and do this week or next week. You can go through it once, just get ideas, and then come back to it next month when you think, oh wait, let me try collaborative paragraph. What is that again? Let me go watch the video. And it's there for you forever if you want to join us. You'll get a certificate of completion for 5 hours, and we're doing digital credentialing now, so you get a little electronic badge you can put on your resume or on LinkedIn. It's one of those, like all the cool kids have them. And we're doing a badge program starting in the fall. All right, so open your mics or in the chat box. What questions do you have? What do you do that is similar, or what did these examples make you think of? Do some brainstorming. Let's take a few minutes and just get your feedback and ideas, because I'm sure you did a lot of cool things in the spring and you're planning a lot of cool things. So feel free to open your mic or put in the chat box. This is the time where I don't know if you're typing or you're waiting quietly. So I'll give it a couple minutes of wait time. I don't want to cut anybody off who's typing. So what ideas or questions do you have? I'm going to put this in the chat box so you have the link. Okay, had to give you a little time to type. Now I see. All right, creating and finding recording books that teachers are using. Yeah, I'm thinking about the 9th graders that I work with and some of the texts that they use. The teachers I was working with, their first thing is always to ask me if we have the text in Spanish, which can help some students. But I think it would really help to get my hands on those and then do some of that read aloud work, like record a segment if there's a really important part that the teacher wants them to work with, that I just make a video of me reading it and they can read along with it as a support. And then again, it's always there. Even if we come back in person, I can always put all of those recordings in a Google Classroom for them to look at later. Suggestions on helping parents and students get onto learning platforms. It's hard. It's very difficult to do hands-on training when you can't be hands-on. I have seen a couple videos from teachers through Twitter or Facebook groups and things where they are creating videos for parents using like a Zoom screen capture like this, or there's a software Loom where you can do screen capture, Screencastify. There's a bunch of different screen capture tools where the video just takes through click by click. I think back to my technology training days, and we used the video, the little hand cams at that time, or you can use phone, whatever, and really just have someone record you, push this button right here. Video is really the only way I can think of, besides then, like you said, a written document where here's your Chromebook, a picture of it. Now here's the button with a little arrow, push here and go bit by bit through that. It's a challenge. I'm hoping that, I know every district is different, but I'm really hoping that we'll be allowed to bring in a couple people at a time, at least, and maybe do some modeling in person, and do some troubleshooting, even if they can come in, 3 students at a time. I know that's not going to be possible everywhere, but that's really what we're hoping to convince administration to do here as well. Let's see what else is coming on in here. Right, you have to make sure you have the same view they do. That's important. I have to borrow a student, ask for a student login or something. I agree with the videos and reading. I mean, I guess the best of both worlds is to have both, and so you have that kind of support. But even now, when I'm learning new things, like when I wanted to learn how to do breakout rooms in Zoom, or you want to learn how to have more than 100 people, they have a lot of video support. And what I like about that is I can do step one and pause it, and then figure out what they were talking about, and then come back and play it. Right, it's at my pace, so it's a little easier too. And then I don't have to ask again when tomorrow I don't remember what the steps were. I think that's one of those things that we're going to have to help each other out as we go. So I hope you will keep the sharing going. I'd be happy to be part of helping Rebecca put that together, but every so often just come together. One thing I really liked about the online teaching course is that we scheduled weekly collaboration calls. So we alternate Mondays and Wednesdays, and we have an hour each week where there's no real agenda unless they ask me to model something in particular. But we just all get online and we start talking about what's working, what's not working. Sometimes we pick a topic like, how are you getting more interaction in with students online, student to student interaction. This week we had someone from Off to Class, and I'll put that in here because you should check out this resource because it's great. And there's a video about it on our website. Off to Class is an online platform that has already made online English language development lessons. And they have a free account where you can get, I think it's up to 150 lessons that you can have access to. And all you would need to do is screen share, and it's already there. So you find a lesson to match what you need. They also have an assessment where you can do a quick screening of students to find out what skills they need, and you can match lessons to those. We talked a little bit about assessment at the beginning, and I think all of our exit tickets are really going to be crucial formative assessments along the way. So having those speaking checklists handy, so when you can pop into a breakout room and just check off what language you're hearing and what you're looking for, and then also evaluating that writing and having them do their own videos to post. Check out Seesaw, Flipgrid, where students can do oral presentations, and Padlet for some writing. So lots of different things, way more than we can cover in an hour, but I hope you got some inspiration, some ideas. You will receive the recording. I'll send out an email when it's ready, and I'll put the link to the recording and to those two lesson templates, the whole part lesson and the read aloud templates. You'll have the PowerPoint, so you can use those slides. So tons of ideas. I hope you'll stay engaged with us so we can help each other out along the way. This is going to be, it's like when the pilot tells you, fasten your seatbelt, it's going to get a little bumpy. But you're always happy when you get to the other side, right, on your plane ride. So that's what I hope happens. So please stay in touch. You have my email from what I sent out. and I'm here. So Rebecca, anytime, just connect us back up. I see your lips moving, Rebecca, but we can't hear you. Her lips are moving.
Can you hear me now?
There you go. Now I hear you.
I wanted to say I wasn't completely plugged in with my telemarketer setup here. I just wanted to say thank you too. It was really great modeling for how to do online instruction. So I enjoyed it.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think it kind of, after getting into it a little bit, I think I'm finding that it's not as different as I thought it would be. And that's comfort. I think once you get in and get going, you will really find that you don't need to know 100 different new technologies. That overwhelmed me at first. It was like, everybody's recommending these things and I need to learn all of them right now. But you really don't. Like, just have a couple. What you'll do to record video and know how to use a few things to get students to speak and to write, and you're good to go. And then when you have brain space, add a new tool or a new trick, but don't stress yourself out. Like, you can do a lot of the same things you do in your classroom. It's just going to get back into your comfort zone. And please reach out, because I'm happy to help. We don't have all the answers, but we have a good group of people who like to brainstorm. So we'll come up with something. We'll figure it out.
That's fantastic. Well, thank you so much. Everyone at Virginia TESOL is so happy that you did this for us, and we'll stay in contact. Anytime you want to do something, you just let me know.
All right, if I come up with some new ideas, I'll
yeah, we'll do it
as my test group.
Yeah, we would love to be your test group.
You're not that far away.
Yeah.
All right. Any last questions?
There was one about read aloud program suggestions.
Okay, let me see. Any read aloud programs suggestions? Do you mean places where things are already recorded that you can go to? Or do you mean to record you recording a read aloud?
There are.
Where they're already recorded. I have some notes on that. Let me dig through. I actually listened to a webinar a couple weeks ago where someone shared a bunch of resources of online literature. So let me dig that up, and I will try to remember to put that in the email as well. If I forget to include it, just remind me. Send me a note and remind me. But I'm going to dig up my notes. She had a lot of good sites that have like free licenses and things. And then I'm sure some of you know some. So Lisa's saying Epic Books have read alouds. A lot of the authors' websites now are including read alouds. And the one I was talking about with Miss Kai is, you can look her up on YouTube or her website, but she's Woke Kindergarten. To be put on flash drives. Some of the sites that I'm thinking about that the person shared in the webinar wouldn't necessarily work with a flash drive, because you go to the site and click on the book and it plays there. If you do a YouTube search and on the title or the author that you're looking for, then you may find that someone's created one and stumble across some good ones. If it's on YouTube, then most of the time you can use a YouTube downloader program and save the video file. And the only caveat with that is if you're saving someone's video, you should ask their permission to do so, and then always include make sure identify them. But most people I've reached out to have been very generous about, it's flattering to them. Like, yes, of course, use my read aloud, because you have different personalities. Some people do amazing read alouds. They're so animated. They'll dress up. They do, like, not me. That's not my style. My students wouldn't get that, but I can give them others. Then you can download the YouTube video, and then you could put that video into the flash drive, and then you can link it with those kind of hot links like the read aloud template. Let me see. I know I have on my computer the YouTube downloader that I use that is pretty reliable. Let me get that link for you here. So with this one, what you do is you find the video on YouTube that you like, and then you copy the URL and you go to this ymate.com, and there's a box. You put the YouTube URL in that box and click download, and it will process it, and then you can download the MP4. Now, some people have protections on their accounts, so you can't do that. But a lot of them you can. And most people I've found, especially now, teachers are so generous right now, because they know we're all struggling to get our resources together. So usually if you send a note and ask permission, people are pretty good about it. Right, so we have to be careful that we're modeling, that we're citing our sources and making sure we're asking for permission and making sure we say who the person is and giving them credit. Absolutely. So I'll look for some of that information. If any of you have a list of links or resources for other read aloud type things, if you want to send it to me, I'd be happy to share it out to the group for you. You have my email, but I will put it in here just in case. So you can send something along and we can share it out. Any last thoughts? All right. Thank you, everybody. You will hear from me as soon as the recording is ready and uploaded. So hopefully later this evening. Worst case scenario, it will be tomorrow morning, but hopefully very soon. Thanks for joining. Thanks
Rebecca.
Rebecca.
Thank you.